Hi, I'm Bob Merlis, and we're in my office here on Larchmont Boulevard in Los Angeles. I run an independent publicity firm called MFH. That's Merlis for Hire, and it's just what it is what it says. You hire me, and I try to help you gain exposure to the best of my ability and that of my staff. I'm going to define exposure in terms of what we do here. In broad strokes, but in the music business, people forever, outsiders, are always confused about what is promotion and what is publicity. And promotion, to my way of thinking, is relative to getting specific radio play, recurrent radio play. Publicity relates to getting your image, likeness, and message out in the media, be it print, television, radio, but not in terms of airplay, recurrent airplay of your music, as well as on the internet. So we're trying to build consciousness of what our clients do, why it's of value, why it's of worth, and all we can do is point people in the right direction. If they hate it, there's nothing you can do about it. But we kind of try to create a circumstance where they'll be open-minded about it and try to, find some kind of confluence with their field of interest. I think publicity is a component of marketing. It's what we do doesn't overtly cost somebody for the space or the exposure you get. It does cost something because you've got time is money, obviously. But if somebody comes to me and says, "I want a full page in Time magazine, can you get it for me?" The answer is, I can try. If you really want a full page in Time magazine, buy an ad. Then you're guaranteed of getting it. But an ad doesn't have the credibility of an article. An article, there is a perception of an article written by an independent third party that somehow there's been a filtering process. I mean, it's more than a perception. That's clearly the way it is. If you just buy an ad, this is a direct communication from the manufacturer, presumably to the consumer. It is perceived as just what it is, advertising, or if you want to denigrate it, propaganda. But there's nothing wrong with it. But it's really not the same thing. Having said that, a publicity campaign can relate to advertising, can relate to marketing. It is part of that. It's part of a whole package. You know what? When I do publicity on an artist and there's something going on in the promotion world, i.e. radio play, I want to know about that. So I can go to the newspaper in that town or the magazine or the TV station and say, the artist that I'm telling you about is getting intensive airplay on such and such a station in your market. That is a tool for me to ratchet the consciousness up and to kind of send a message that this is of relevance to your viewership, listenership, readership. Getting somebody on the phone is step one, or having somebody read your correspondence. And my hope is they think, oh, well, it's coming from this guy. He's credible. He's brought me things of worth in the past, and will pay attention, if however minimal. You got to get your foot in the door so that they can see what it is you're pushing. And basically, it's just a question of giving them a story, a background that is compelling enough for them to go a little further, to look deeper, to actually listen to music that you're trying to get over, or attend a concert or something like that. But there are no guarantees in this world. Just by telling someone about your project doesn't mean they're necessarily going to cover it in any significant way. But it's kind of trench warfare. I am selective about who we take on here. A lot of artists and managers and relatives come to us and say, "Here, we'll pay you. Go do what you do." And I just can't do that. I'm really great at cashing checks, but I want my skill to be more than just that, to be perceived as more than just that. And there have been numerous clients or prospective clients that we've just had to walk away from because I didn't think we would be able to get the traction on their behalf. And there's a question of credibility for us. The next time out, oh, you're the guys who, promoted that, kazoo player that was really not worthy of consideration. I mean, if I'm going to take a project on, I want to give it, adequate attention and I'll tell you a little anecdote. An independent promotion radio guy came to me and said, "Hey, I have a client I'm working for who has a new record out. And this guy, or it was a female artist, and her husband was, well off and was underwriting this endeavor. You could have this client, and you could do well with it." And I listened to it. I said, "I just don't think I could do very well with it." And whereas the client would probably pay me until they, folded their tents, I would have to have gone to my contacts and said, "Hey, check this out." And I don't want to be in a position to do that if I don't feel strongly that the music is worthwhile on some level or another. I don't have to love it myself, but I have to be able to convince people that it's of worth on some level. Most of the clients we get are based on referrals or history. I worked for Warner Brothers Records for more than half my life, so people know me from that, and people in the label field are aware of us. I don't overtly go out there and network and glad hand and try to make rain per se, but it happens, and there are clients that I would love to have because I respect the music so much, or have some kind of personal history from going back in time. So, well, I was going to reference Dion, who I just got on the phone there a minute ago. He's a guy I worked with in the 70s and love his music and so on. And when he did a blues album, he came to me. I'm really happy about it because I reconnected with a guy I really like a lot who did something of great artistic worth. Most record labels have a publicity department. I mean, certainly when I was at Warner Brothers, we had a significantly large publicity department, and that company still has a really together publicity department. But invariably, you have to go outside for some of the services, or the artist demands it or just underwrites it himself because they want a certain kind of attention or a different kind of skew or a level of expertise that might not exist at the label. When I was at Warner Brothers for all those years, I was kind of skeptical about the worth of independent publicists because I had to pay them a lot, but they do take a huge burden off. It's like, hey, we paid you to do it, go do it. Now you've got to ride roughshod over the independents to make sure they're really delivering to you. And I make it a point to be in constant communication with whichever label has the artist I'm working on, whether the label is paying me or whether the artist is paying me. The label has assets I don't have, and I like to work with them because you can, have a kind of a critical mass situation and do much better than you would flying completely solo. I started in the music business in 1969. I was just fresh out of college, and in college I had promoted concerts on campus and publicized them in a big way. I mean, I mimeographed flyers. That was very kind of ground level kind of concert promotion, and I wanted to be in the music business, so I just knocked on a lot of doors, and I got a job at a trade magazine, Record World. In those days, there were three major weekly music biz trade magazines: Billboard, Cashbox, and Record World. Only Billboard survives. But Record World hired me literally off the street, and they had no idea what I did or what I could do. But I remember when I talked to whoever I spoke to there, I said, "I really know a lot about records. I can tell you the B-side of a lot of records and the music publisher," because I read record labels, and because I was a record collector as a kid. And I guess my passion convinced them to, take a shot for $100 a week. We'll see what this guy can do. And it worked out. After I was at Record World for a few years, I was hired by Warner Brothers to be a publicist, which I knew nothing about. I mean, nothing about being a publicist. There was no school you go to. Just because I wrote for a trade magazine didn't mean I knew how to do publicity. My impulse, my first day on the job was to call the people I used to work with at Record World and say, "Hey, you want to talk to Mark Bolan?" or whoever I was working with at the time. I had to kind of feel my way through that and see how it's really done. There's a lot different today. When I started, it was very record-oriented, and I don't mean, that format that was records versus tapes or CDs. It was oriented towards what the music was, and the messages and lyrics of songs and the musical context in which that was presented. It's much more personality related today, and I think it's because the media is so invasive, I guess is the word, and people are interested in, not quite literally, but close, what so-and-so ate for breakfast versus, what the follow-up to your last hit single was. The skew is different. Obviously, the common denominator is the music, but how it's packaged and presented is quite different. I mean, we had singles, singles with no MTV and very few print outlets. People really didn't know what the artist looked like to a great extent. I just heard the most amazing anecdote, and it made me laugh so much, but I understood it. I saw a little documentary film on the Turtles, and when they just started, they would go into different venues and make believe they were Jerry and the Pacemakers to get gigs, and they'd put on English accents and do this whole routine. And the logic was, everybody knows what the Beatles look like, but nobody knows what Jerry and the Pacemakers look like. And they knew the guys' names, and they'd make believe they were Jerry and the Pacemakers, for better or worse. I don't know how many bookings they got as Jerry and the Pacemakers, but you couldn't possibly do that now. When I worked at Warner Brothers years and years ago, there was a fake Rod Stewart running around. And, there was a guy, he had the pineapple hairdo, and he made believe he was Rod Stewart. I don't think he got bookings, but he tried to get free drinks or, make it with different women and so on. And every now and then I get a call, is Rod Stewart really here in Sheboygan? And, and that couldn't possibly happen now. I mean, it just couldn't without, somebody, altering his face. The internet has made my job, it's a little bit easier, but the expectations are higher, so I guess it's a wash, because you can do things quite instantly now, where, I'd used to say in a realistic way, well, I can't do that now, I'm waiting for this information to come in, and when we have the such and such, we'll get to work on whatever the project is. Now, there's no excuse. You could get it that minute. There's no problem with waiting for the biography or the photo to get to the magazine or the other website. You could do that in a second. So the expectation is instant gratification. If you can turn things around instantaneously, why can't you get a result instantaneously? And people still have to consider things. They still have to decide whether they want to do it. You can barrage them with tons of information, but they put a delete button on all these machines. So, there's no telling that they're really absorbing it. So it's kind of the same job it was, but with new tools. If you wanted to start out in publicity today, I'd say, it's hard to say. I can't undo what I've done. I think it'd be better to be more wide-ranging than just music. It's a concern of mine that the music business hasn't figured out where the business is, since it's been the subject of so much upheaval. So to just decide, I want to work for a record label, may be a little short-sighted. I think the best thing you can do is write. I don't think it's a prerequisite for doing publicity, but it's very helpful if you can write about it, and you are on the receiving end of publicity outreach. You kind of get a sense of how it works. Just to do it cold I think would be probably quite difficult. I'm an automotive journalist. I have something else that I do that has no specific relation to music, and as such, I get pitches from publicists. And I'm always amazed because, oh, hey, they do what I do, except they don't know I do that. And I'm subject to interesting pitches where people are kind of reading a script. And I realize sort of, a few minutes into it, they don't know who I am. Meaning they haven't done any research to find out what are the topics that I typically deal with in my automotive journalism realm. So if they're calling me about a run-flat tire, if they ever read any of the stuff I wrote, they'd know that's probably not something I'd be too interested in. But that's kind of the scattershot approach. Call everybody ever in your database and tell them all the same thing. I don't think that's a good use of time. I think it's better to customize the pitch to the recipient of the pitch. It would be like going to someone whose specialty is country music and pitching him on a heavy metal band. It's like, why bother? He's not going to pick up on it. It's you should do the research beforehand and find out who are the people who care about heavy metal, who are the specialists in this field, who are the generalists who might be open-minded to it. But don't bother with someone for whom it's just far left field. The two really have very little to do with each other. I mean, the fact that I'm an automotive journalist is just like it's just a quirk. I do it because I like it. I don't really make the bulk of my income from it, but I've been published in a bunch of magazines, and the two do come together because cars and rock and roll do have an awful lot of threads that bind them together. And I guess in the most demonstrable way that they came together in my, career, my professional life, is when I was called upon to curate the Cars and Guitars of Rock and Roll exhibit at the Peterson Museum. So that's like, well, here's the guy who's from the music business, and he knows about cars. So, okay, we'll put them together. And I used some of the contacts that I had cultivated over the years to get different artists to let us borrow their cars and put them in the museum and so on. And I mean, it happens. There were times when the twain do meet. I represent ZZ Top, so the hot rod and all that stuff in Billy Gibbons' wonderful car collection. We can riff on that, and there are places where there is overlap. But I don't think I represent ZZ Top because I know something about cars. But it's helpful. It's fun to have something else going that I don't have to be too serious about because it really doesn't reflect my survival. It's kind of an interest, and it's great to be paid to be involved in something that isn't specific to your quote job. So that's fun, when I write an article and do research on whatever I'm doing in the car field. It's just different. It's just and the people in the car business are interested in me because oh, you have this juxtaposition to these music people. So I don't know. I don't think it makes me exotic per se, but it gives me something else to talk about besides, cubic inch displacement. It's difficult to do your own publicity. It would make me feel icky to do my own publicity because it seems unseemly. It's like, hey, check me out. I'm the one. To use the first person is like, you may want to adopt another persona and be somebody else. I mean, you got to do it. I think the thing to do is to find a champion, find someone who believes in your music in the media. I'm working on a country artist now named David Serby, who's independent and so on, but he hired us to help him get the message out. But he'd already found a couple of people in the media who liked him a lot. That got me turned on to how good he was. I think if he'd come to me cold, I might have said, well, I don't think we can do much for you. But I saw that something was going on, and I was excited about that, and he took a lot of initiative and got himself booked on some dates at South by Southwest and the Stagecoach Festival and Coachella. So I thought, oh, and this guy has some momentum. I respect that. I want to be part of that. But he got some breaks. He's good at what he does, so that's first and foremost the most important thing. But he got some breaks because he just sort of bumped into people who wrote for different outlets who kind of sparked to him. I don't think he actually called up, the Hollywood Reporter and said, check me out. It was more an organic kind of thing. But it's always connections, people who know people who know people, and that's how it goes. I typically would shy away from a self-released album. It's just because it's not taken that seriously in the media. So it's much harder to get the message across. There's a lot of dubious thinking about that. Of course, Annie DeFranco is being the hugest exception to that idea. But now she's not, she releases her own records, but she has an organization that does it. Same is true of Dave Matthews, his ATO organization. So it's at a different level. I can tell you the three warning signs for me as an independent publicist when a prospective client comes in, and whether you should actually think about not taking the gig. This presumes the music is okay. If the music's terrible, then just don't bother. One, if the manager or your main liaison is a spouse or parent, you can never be brutally honest because they take it personally, and it's painful for them to hear bad news, and it's you want an intermediary who is balanced, and I don't think you can be if it's your wife or your husband or your girlfriend or your kid or your mom. I don't know. But children as parents are a little different. Mm-hmm. Both Tony Bennett and Gladys Knight have children as parents. Children as managers. That actually is a little better. Mm-hmm. I think you can be more critical of your parents than of your kids. And if the prospective client, quote, talks shit about the previous publicist, you can bet that your name will be inserted into that slot in the future. I have respect for people who do what I do. Some of them do it better than others. But I had a prospective client who, by the way, was managed by his wife, so right away, red flag, who told me that the last publicist couldn't even get, insert name of artist here, on The Tonight Show. And I'm thinking, yeah, and I'm sure I couldn't even get this artist on The Tonight Show. So how about I don't even take this client because their expectations were not in line with reality. And the other thing is the independently released. Oh no, the other thing is a record that's been out for a long time. It's terrible because everybody in the media is looking for a reason not to cover something. So if you bring them an album and you're asked, when did this come out? The answer, 3 months ago. It's like, it's too late. We don't know why it's too late, but it's too late. They want to arbitrarily find a way out of having to deal with something. So with clients, I've set release dates, even though they're ready to go, and to say, let's set the release date 2 months from now, 3 months from now, so nobody will have that excuse. It's the tail wagging the dog, to be sure, but it's helpful. And I've just come up with release dates for some things that, with a free-floating way records are released now outside of the major label realm, you can just arbitrarily say, this is out on May 6th, but we have copies now in. Please review it, and if you're going to review it, if you could time it to around May 6th, that would be great. But if you run it before, that's not so bad either, because then you use that to generate additional press interest. If I get a wonderful review in the Buffalo News, I can send it to somebody in Florida or Nevada and say, look at this. It's not a competition thing. I'm not showing them you missed the boat. I'm saying if you're savvy and open-minded, you'll check this out. This other writer found great worth in this. I would like the music to be significant. I would like the artist to have some kind of a context. Where do you fit in the universe of not a genre-specific thing, but who if I can relate to so-and-so, can I relate to you? Like David Serby, the guy I was just talking about, he said, well, he's in the tradition of Buck Owens and Dave Alvin. I said, okay, Dave Alvin, I get it. It's a roots Americana thing with a country overtone. It gives people a point of reference, and that's helpful. Some shy away from that. They don't want to be pegged as, a certain genre of music. I deal with an artist who said, here, I don't want you to call me a blues-related artist. I don't want you to call me a singer-songwriter. Well, the music is blues-tinged, and he does write all the songs and sing them. So you could say that. And I understand what he's saying. If you say singer-songwriter, you get a picture of Jackson Browne in your head. And if you say blues, you get a picture of, a guy with a floppy hat and a feather in it playing 12-bar blues. So I understand he didn't want to be pigeonholed. So I just in the promotional piece I wrote about him, I just said, Ron Franklin says, don't call me blues, and, I don't want to be called a singer-songwriter. Ron, who are we to argue with your wisdom? By saying that, I said it without saying it. I unsaid it. We used this years ago at Warner Brothers with when the Talking Heads and the Dead Boys and the Ramones came out. We had a campaign that said, don't call it punk. I guess it was by saying, don't call it punk, we kind of called it punk. Mm-hmm. You can call it whatever you want, but, you need some kind of touchstone. You got to have a shortcut for people to have just some idea how they can relate to it, on what basis they can relate to it. The idea that, no one appears in a void, so as a publicist, I'm looking for an angle. I'm looking for a pitch that will just get somebody's attention long enough so they'll listen to it and then decide it's worthy on its own merits. I work with John Mellencamp and have for quite a few years, and his new album he told me about how it was recorded, and I listened to the songs, and they're really great. He said, we recorded this in a garage. I said, literally? He says, well, our rehearsal hall is a converted garage. And we went in there, and we got the songs together with the band, and then we thought, let's just record it here, and then we'll do the post-production in the legitimate recording studio. So okay, I get it, garage band. I can relate to garage band. It had sort of echoes of a 60s sound anyway. And invariably in TV interviews and print interviews, when people see this in the stuff we've created, it's based on reality. We didn't create it, we reflected it. And they all bring up, John, I understand your album was recorded in a garage. How did they always do that? And it's great because that's what I like to call it a menu, the closer. You see that's like spaghetti and meatballs with chili peppers. Like, ooh, chili pepper. That's the closer. That makes you order it. That makes you buy into it. It's not the main course. The main course is the meal. The main course is the music. But there's something that sort of, focuses you on. And in the case of the current John Mellencamp album, it's like, well, recorded in a garage, really? What's that about? And, it's a great little touchstone. I'm not saying John wouldn't have gotten equivalent amount of interest without that story, but it's true, and people kind of focus on it. It makes it an easy door opener, or an easier door opener. We do press releases that indicate, an album is going to be out at a certain time, or a performance is going to be at a certain time, or a tour, and so on. And it's basically informational stuff. We try to relate it to something current. We worked with a group called Deep Dish, who are a big dance music group, and we found out that there was an Iranian-American woman who paid to go into space, and a huge amount of money, and she brought a Deep Dish music with her. So it's great. The music that you can't hear in Iran, because there's the prohibition on a lot of Western kind of music, by Iranians, listened to by Iranian in outer space. There was a great story there. It's there's so much kind of geopolitics going on there, and just brings more attention to the group who we're promoting, and it's, whether you never hear a lick of music, it would be, it'll be something that would get your attention, and hopefully you do hear a lick of music sooner or later. The information includes the factual stuff. Joe Blow made an album. He did it with such and such musicians. It harkens to such and such a sound. We all relate it to whatever whatever the focus is, and a date. And we'd like to send you a copy, or if you're interested, please get in touch. We're not entirely passive. We send notices out that things are happening, then we follow up, or just unilaterally decide this is a folk-sounding record. We need to send it to a folk-oriented magazine, whether they ask for it or not. I hate that because it's like you have no idea whether anybody opens these things. It's tough. I mean, it's really the percentage of albums, physical albums that are sent that people actually listen to on the other end. I think it's quite minimal. But I don't know another way to do it. When I worked at Warner Brothers, it's hilarious. The CFO called me into his office and said, "Why do you send all these albums to these writers?" I said, "Because we want them to review it." "But they don't review every album you send them, do they?" I said, "No." He said, "Why don't you just send them the albums they're going to review?" I said, "Because they got to listen to them to decide whether they're going to review them or not. Except for the superstars who are automatic. They have to be dealt with because, here's a new U2 album. What are you going to do, ignore it? How would a new artist ever get, some kind of attention? I mean, there might be something worthwhile. I mean, presumably the A&R department signed the artist because they thought it was worthwhile. How could you not send it out? It would be like you're sitting on your hands. You can't. It was very hard for him to understand that. But hey, finance guy, what can I tell you? It's fun for the artists to go to red carpet events, and I mean, I don't know if you could quantify that into record sales. Who knows what makes records sell anymore anyway? But it keeps the level of consciousness up. I took Billy Gibbons to from ZZ Top to the premiere of this big basketball movie about a team of black kids in Texas, and something glory. I'm sorry. IMDb, where are you now that I need you? Anyway, took Billy there. It was a Texas team. It seemed to make sense. And he got to meet all these great basketball players. It was fun for him. And, You know, his picture was in the paper the next day. ZZ Top's Billy Gibbons at such and such. It was great. I took him to a Lamborghini event. There's the cars in rock and roll coming together, and the people in the automotive world were out of their minds to see, you know, an icon of music there at their event with their $500,000 car or whatever it was. You know, it was fun for everybody. I mean, I think it's a perk, really. I think there's a cumulative thing, but there's probably a point of diminishing return if you're at every opening every day and you don't do anything musically. It's like, okay, you're famous for being famous, but you know, in the case of Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top, they make great records and they're iconic, and why not? They add to any circumstance they might be in. I don't know about famous for being famous. I think you have to be like extraordinarily outrageous to do it. I don't know what the benefit is. I don't know how you monetize that. There are people who, you know, you see at these events and they're kind of like they used to call them socialites. I mean, people who go to, you know, social events and so on. And socialites in the old days were wealthy people, and they were either philanthropists or, you know, people involved in whatever the causes were or the cultural events. And now they're just people who are, you know, sort of on the perimeter of the arts or entertainment, who just are there. I mean, it's a lot of it is just sort of projecting sexuality rather than talent. So I don't really have any clients like that. So it's hard for me to say. I worked with Madonna at one time when Liz Rosenberg's her primary publicist, but I would help Liz on occasion, and that was different. When Madonna went to something, it was specific to a project. It just didn't, you know, hang out to be seen. It's not her interest. She's a serious, creative person. So just to go to a party, to be on a red carpet for the sake of it, there's nothing in it for her. Mm-hmm. She brings more to the event than the event would bring to her. So what's the point? I'm happy I made a career in the music business when I did. I'd really be concerned if I started, you know, 20 years later, because I'm seeing it change, and I do try to be flexible, but, you know, I don't know where it's going. I have no forecast on that. I don't know how my set of skills and talents relates to what's going to happen in the future. I mean, you always need people to be, you know, sound the clarion's call about, you know, what's upcoming and what's of worth. So I think in that sense, people will be doing what I'm doing in the future. The techniques that are used and the methods that you used that will be used are going to change. Listen, they've changed from the time I got in the business. When I first started, I had to go down the hall to another company when I was at Record World to use a fax machine because we didn't have one. A magazine that didn't have a fax machine. Imagine that. Didn't seem to be a big problem. We put an issue out every week with typewriters. So I guess we adapted. I wore my tie and everything. This is branding.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It actually really
I prefer to wear a bow tie than a long tie. I mean, so I became known as the guy with the bow tie. I mean, I didn't intentionally do it.
Yeah.
So then I thought, all right, when I go to a function or when I meet somebody in the press, I'll just wear a tie, a bow tie, because that's what I wear. And I've gone places where I didn't happen to wear a tie, but people are disappointed. Like, well, so what? I'm the same guy. But, I figure, okay, I put it on. Whenever I have a meeting with a client, I put it on, even if I'm wearing blue jeans, because it's like, all right, I guess you're paying for this. I can't, why this makes a difference to you. I guess it's just an identity thing, you know. It's like, John Mellencamp's always wearing a white T-shirt. No one told him to do that. He likes to do it, but he's identified that way. So it makes sense. It reinforces who he is to himself first and foremost. He doesn't do it for public consumption, but people know him by that. I guess they know me by this to some extent. I hope my work speaks for me more than my tie.